everyone. Um, this church, as Ruth said, is founded in reason, making rational decisions based on the best evidence we have available, and in compassion, being excellent to each other. And in that spirit, there are few people whose work we should hold in higher esteem than that of John Gottman, his wife and collaborator Julie Schwartz Gottman, and their fellow researchers. They have established a known science of relationships. There are specific, practical things you can do to objectively improve your marriage or other long-term partnership, whether romantic or otherwise, although they usually focus on marriages. These principles do apply to friendships, to parent-child relationships, even to work relationships. Although most of the language in this talk will be focused on romantic partnerships. Background for the Gottmans. They've been doing this relationship research for over 40 years at this point, and where most relationship self-help book writers are basically writing, they're pulling it out of somewhere, but it's not out of the lab. The Gottmans are working, they're doing lab research on relationships. It's evidence-based very firmly. They began by having couples come in and talk about things they disagreed on. John Gottman originally expected to find that couples who talked more deeply about topics in order to resolve problems had happier relationships. It's not what he found. He found that what couples talked about mattered much less than how they talked about it and how they even didn't talk about it. The content mattered much less than the form of the communication. He ended up having, and I'll say he through much of this because John Gottman was kind of the primary researcher to begin with, and he's worked with a bunch of different people, including his wife, Julie Schwartz Gottman, but he's the consistent thread through this, so I'll just use he. He had couples interact, having both everyday conversations and conversations about difficult topics they disagreed on in the past. But rather than just recording what they said and making notes, like a therapist usually would, he wired them up. He had video cameras on them, had lab assistants recording eye blinks, direction of gaze, pulse monitors were measuring their heart rate. They had sweat detectors. They're measuring all these different physiological and micro expression indicators, just studying everything, like all the data. And what he found from tracking this detailed information in the moment and longitudinal study of couples over time, over 6 years in some cases, he learned principles about how the couples who stayed happily married did it, what they did in common, and the couples that broke up in those 6 years or who were still married but were really unhappy about it. And the differences are really striking in how these different sets of couples behave toward each other. There are really clear patterns. At this point, he can tell from observing a 10-minute conversation between a couple whether they will divorce in the next 6 years with over 90% accuracy. It's right there in how they're communicating in every conversation in their lives. So these habits, these ways of communicating with each other are things that you can learn and decide to do. You can improve your relationship by acting on this research. He and Julie Gottman and other researchers that he has worked with and written with have many, many books presenting their findings, both to the public in really accessible and applicable ways, and also to other researchers. Their books for the general public include Why Marriages Succeed or Fail, The Relationship Cure, 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, and What Makes Love Last. There's a stack of them. And they all have the same core concepts because they're working from the same research. There are certain things that he found, he's built on it as he went, so the later books sometimes have some newer research in them. They focus on different aspects. Sometimes they focus on different kinds of relationships. He's got one on abusive relationships. He's got one on raising kids to be emotionally intelligent. He's got one on, he's got multiple ones aimed at therapists in more detail and kind of scientific presentation. But anyway, he's got huge stacks of books. I recommend all the ones I've read, which is like 7 or 8, I think. But basically, they all have the same concepts. And I'm going to present just kind of one core concept here with a little bit of venture into some of the other things. There are many, many valuable things to learn from his books and from the Gottman Institute website and the classes they offer and so on. But this talk is focused primarily on one of the most critical concepts to maintaining and nurturing relationships, turning towards one another. When I'm in a relationship with someone, every time I interact with them, I can make bids for connection. A bid for connection can be anything. It can be tiny, like a smile, or how was your day, or touching them on the shoulder, or making them breakfast in the morning. Or it could be something huge. It could be a grand act like proposing marriage. But most of the bids for connection that we make are the small ones. They're little, tiny, everyday things. And how we make and respond to these everyday bids for connection shapes our relationships. People in happy marriages make bids constantly, like 100 over one meal. And people who are in unhappy relationships or whose relationships are becoming less happy over time are making fewer bids and responding to them less or less well. We can respond to bids in any of 3 ways. We can turn away, we can turn against, or we can turn towards. Turning away can be a literal turning your back on someone, turning your body, facing away from them. It can be silence. It can be ignoring what they said and changing the subject. Any kind of passive rejection, not responding to what they said, is a turning away from their bid. This kind of passive rejection or missing the bid, like maybe you didn't even hear it or didn't process it as a bid, missing the bid or passive rejection leads to disconnection and loneliness. The partner experiences sadness. If it's a habitual response, they may disengage from the relationship because they're not getting their bids for connection returned. They may seek connection elsewhere, go find some other emotional attachment where they do get a response. Turning against is active rejection. Scornful words, sighing, scoffing, rolling your eyes, yelling, insulting the remark or the speaker. All of these are forms of turning against. Slapping away a touch, any kind of a hostile response to a bid for connection. The partner being turned against may experience fear or shame. And if that's a habitual response, they're going to learn not to make overtures. They don't want to make bids if they're going to be responded to in a hostile fashion. They're afraid of further angry responses or being insulted. They may leave the relationship because this is so unpleasant. But against and turning away hurt the partner and hurt the relationship, and they squander opportunities to connect. It is possible to turn away or turn against without realizing you're doing it. What we want to be doing as much as possible is turning towards bids for connection and turning towards the person making them. That's responding to the bid for connection in a way that indicates interest and caring. It could be smiling back, passing the butter when they ask, answering the question, sharing something about your day when they ask, hey, how was your day? These are small things, but they are responsive to the bid. And if we are mostly responding to our partner's bids for connection by turning towards them, our relationship will not only be maintained, but improve. These are feedback loops. The first step in turning towards a bid is to notice that the bid's been made. Pay attention and notice what your partner is doing or saying when they're asking you for a connection with you. Notice that that's happening. We can't catch everyone. And sometimes we're tired or we're distracted and we can't respond gracefully. But people in happy, lasting relationships respond to bids for connection by turning towards 86% of the time. That's the average for the category of relationships that ended up lasting. People in relationships that don't last respond to an average of 33% of bids. So it was a huge difference between these two categories. And it's an enormous difference in action and in effect. And in part, that's because our responses to bids create these feedback loops. If I get a positive response to my bid, I'm going to make more bids, and my partner is going to respond positively to those, and they're going to make more bids, and I'm going to respond positively to those, and we're going to have a nurturing relationship where we're happy with each other. If, on the other hand, when I try to make a bid, it gets slapped down or ignored, I'm going to make fewer bids. My partner is going to notice I'm not connecting with them. They're not going to make bids either. We're going to go downhill instead. So you can improve your relationship by just shifting the direction a little bit. The more you can shift it towards turning towards, the better your relationship can be, because you're encouraging both yourself and your partner to have better experiences of each other. If your relationship doesn't have this kind of positive feedback loop, start noticing when your partner's making bids and try to make a conscious effort to turn towards them. This doesn't mean you have to agree with everything your partner says or respond positively to every suggestion they make or like everything they do. You don't have to agree with it to respond in a way that indicates you care about your partner and you care about the relationship. So let's say you hate superhero movies and your partner says, hey, let's go to the latest Avenger movie this weekend. You don't have to say, great, let's go. But you could say, oh, it's not really my thing, but could we see another movie? Or why don't you see that one with your best friend? I'd rather stay home with you tonight. Or, oh, it's good? Curiosity, let's see what they've heard. Maybe they can even change your mind. Or, gosh, this weekend I have to finish this huge project, but we can have a date on Tuesday. All of these things are ways of responding without feeling forced to be positive about something you're not. So this is not about you have to agree with your partner, you have to make nice. This is about indicate that you care about your partner. So the key is you want to answer the relational essence of the bid positively. Bids for connection have a surface level. If I say, could you pass the butter? The surface level is I want the butter. But it's also a bid for connection. If I kind of shove the butter across the table silently without looking at you, I've given you the butter, but I haven't really responded to the bid for connection. I could do the opposite. I could say, oh, sorry, I got my hands full. I haven't given you the butter, but I've given you, I care about you. So think about how you are supporting your relationship with your partner in how you respond. It's not just about what they're asking for or what they're saying or doing. It's about saying you care about the connection. I mentioned the Four Horsemen in my description, so I want to at least go over a little bit of what those mean in Gottman's layout of what helps and what harms relationships. The Four Horsemen are 4 responses and types of behavior that Gottman discovered are most destructive of relationships. And these do all relate to how we respond to bids for connection. 1 is criticism. 2 is contempt. 3 is defensiveness. And 4 is stonewalling. Criticism and contempt are both kinds of turning against. They're hostile responses. Criticism is insulting the person. Usually you're describing, insulting the essence of the person rather than making a complaint about a specific behavior or situation. And the way to avoid criticism is to focus on, I am having this particular problem, I have this need that needs to be filled, rather than, you suck, why are you always like this? which is a very different kind of statement, even if it's responding to the same situation. Contempt, the second horseman, is the #1 predictor of divorce. If you treat your partner with contempt, you will make them unhappy, and you will either lose them or you will just continue to have an unhappy relationship. Strive to treat your partner with caring and respect and not with contempt. If you feel like you need to treat them with contempt, it's better to remove yourself than to be there rolling your eyes or snapping. Basically, the antidote for contempt is to build a culture of mutual appreciation in your relationship, to remember your partner's good qualities. And I will get to positive sentiment override in a minute, which is a major part of countering contempt. Third horseman is defensiveness. Defensiveness is partner comes to you, hey, you know, I have this problem, and you go, well, it's not my fault and I didn't do that, and besides you always. If you respond with complaint with why it's not your fault and why you shouldn't have had to or whatever, your defensiveness is going to damage both the ability to solve the problem and the interaction that you're having, your relationship with your partner. The antidote for defensiveness is take responsibility for the actions you took and apologize for what you can genuinely apologize for. Don't do a non-apology like, I'm sorry you feel that way, but say, hey, I'm sorry I left that there. That was bad of me. Even if there were reasons why you left it there, even if there were things they were supposed to have done that would have made it easier, apologize for the piece you can, go on from there. And I'll get to a little more of that later too. Stonewalling is when you respond to your partner's needs, complaints, etc., by just not responding. You stand there and you stare at them, you glare, you do tight lips, maybe you even turn your back, you don't talk. If they're coming to you pleading with a problem and you are not responding, that stonewalling is very damaging to the relationship as well. Defensiveness and stonewalling are ways of turning away. So we don't want to do any of these. These can all be very damaging. If you are finding yourself stonewalling, it's probably because you are in a situation where you are emotionally flooded. It's more than you can handle. If your partner is not responding, they may be flooded. It's a good idea to take a break, work on self-soothing, come back when you can. Don't slam doors on your way out. Don't try to have the last word. Just say, I need a break. I'll talk about this later. If you've set up in advance that it is okay to safe word on a conversation, it's easier to do this even when you're upset. It's hard not to yell or try to have the last word if you haven't set up a safe word or an it's okay to just walk out standard in advance. So you might be thinking, yeah, but what if we're dealing with irreconcilable differences? I mean, you're talking about how relationships can be helped, but what if you really have an irreconcilable difference in your relationship? One of the things Gottman found out is that every relationship has irreconcilable differences. There's something where they never work it out. There's some, you know, maybe it's cleaning up the house. They're constantly having conflicts about it. Or maybe one person really doesn't like living where you live and the other one does, and they can never quite decide, are we moving or not? Maybe it's some little thing that, you know, I hate you have this habit, you just always have this habit. Whatever the irreconcilable difference is, it matters less exactly what it is than how you handle it. If you have an overwhelmingly harmonious relationship and this one thing that drives you crazy, you'll probably still be okay. But if you have a relationship that is mostly full of being short with each other, missing connections, those differences that aren't resolved are going to end up being the overwhelming thing in the relationship. It's not that every relationship can be worked out, but that every relationship can be made better or worse drastically by how you respond to each other's bids. So let me talk about negative and positive sentiment override. How you respond to a particular incident or action is shaped strongly by how you're already feeling about the relationship going into that incident. If your overall experience of your partner for the past week or 6 months or 10 years has been that they ignore you or nitpick or respond with hostility when you try to talk to them, you're not going to be feeling trusting or generous when they have a suggestion or a request. You're going to go into the conversation suspicious, resentful, and you're going to probably respond defensively rather than with cooperation or compassion. On the other hand, if your experience with your partner over time has been that they smile at you, listen to you, support you in adversity, and work out problems with you, then not only are you going to be open to the requests, most likely, you're probably even going to be forgiving of something that sounds clumsy or maybe even a hurtful remark or an oversight. You're more likely to think, I must be missing something, or wow, she must be really upset to behave like that. You're going to go in with curiosity and compassion rather than with defensive resentfulness and anger. Rather than a what a jerk to treat me like that kind of judgment. Making bids and responding to them by turning towards, extended over time, is what creates a positive sentiment override. That means that even if something is unpleasant now, you have an overwhelmingly positive experience of the person and the relationship, and that lets you ride through something that is less pleasant. It's what lets relationships weather challenges. You want to be in the range of 86% turning towards in order to build that positive sentiment override rather than the 33% range, which leads to detachment and negative sentiment override. Mistakes happen. There are accidents in communication. There are misunderstandings. There are times when we don't understand what somebody needed and we do the wrong thing. And when we have these mishaps, it is very important to make repair attempts. Repair attempts are a special category of bid. When you know something's gone wrong and you're trying to reassure your partner that you care about them and you want to resolve the problem and meet their needs. It's really important to know your audience or read the room, as it were. There are kinds of repair attempts that can fall flat. Don't try to make a joke about something that someone is going to hear as dismissing their need. Don't try to touch them if they have a panic response to being touched when they're stressed out. Know your partner. This is a place where knowing about love languages, which is from an entirely different researcher, can be helpful. If you know what helps your partner feel cared for, do something in that vein. And keep doing repair attempts. If you're having a problem with your partner and things are going badly, keep making bids that show them you care about the relationship, even if you haven't solved the problem. If one thing doesn't work, try something else. If you're not even speaking to each other, there are still repair attempts you can make. If everything seems to be making things worse, then take a break gently. Say, let's try talking again in an hour, or leave them a note saying, I'm going to go take a walk. In that time, do what you can to de-escalate yourself. And then try to think of what would help reassure your partner. You don't have to try to solve the actual problem. In fact, it's a bad idea to try to solve the problem without feedback from your partner, because you may not understand what the problem is. You probably don't. If you're really furious with your life partner, there's probably something one or the other of you is missing about the situation. So get yourself calm before you try to solve the problem. Even if you're too hurt or angry to speak to each other, like I said, you can still make repair attempts. There have been times when Mickey and I have had an interaction go horribly wrong. I couldn't think of a specific example to use here, but there have been multiple times when we've had conversations that just went horribly. We were both feeling betrayed, or actually, since betrayal isn't a feeling, it's a story, we were interpreting what each other said and did as evidence of betrayal and feeling scared, angry, sad, lonely, etc. But you can still, even if you're not speaking to each other, we brought each other food, reminded each other of things that they needed reminding, took care of tasks we said we'd do, sent texts with apologies for the little bits we could stomach apologizing for until we were, all of these little steps help maintain I still care about you. We're still a team, even if this is going horribly right now. And that will help you get back to the point where you can talk about it and figure out what the problem actually is once you're in the setting where, right, we're together on this. Note that some people have a higher sensitivity to rejection and abandonment. People who have ADHD, PTSD, any kind of a history of abuse or neglect will be hyper alert for signs that they are being neglected, rejected, abandoned, and it'll be harder for them to come back down and feel connected. So it makes communication mishaps higher stakes for them and their partners. They need more time, they need more gentleness, but the process is the same for everybody. You've got to get yourself to a state where you're feeling more open, keep making the repair attempts you both can handle until you can either resolve the problem or let it go. Sometimes you're not going to be able to resolve it, but the relationship is still okay. There are so many other lessons to be taken from the Gottmans' work and writings, and I really recommend reading their books. But if you learn one thing from their research, it should be to make bids for connection often. Okay, maybe this is two things. And to respond to bids by turning toward your partner as much as possible. You're not going to get every single one. Even people who have been in very happy relationships for many decades don't catch every bid. But respond to most of them positively by turning towards your partner rather than against or away. Show your partner you care about them and the relationship in ongoing everyday ways. That's what builds the foundation for a long, happy relationship, whether a marriage or any other kind of partnership. And it allows you to survive challenges from within or from without.